Welcome back to our next panel, Synesthetic Laboratories of Art and Science. I'm very glad to moderate it today. During this panel, among the other things, we will come again to speak about the neuroscientific research in the field of synesthesia, the topic that we were actively discussing yesterday. And we will talk not only about scientific and psychological perspective of this research, but also about its role in the current artistic praxis. Now I would like to move on to our next speaker who is present today, and we are very glad to have you with us, Madi. So let me introduce Madi Boyd first, biographically. Madi Boyd graduated from the Slade School of Art in London in sculpture in 2005. Her work explores interactions between space, moving image, and the brain. An important part of her artistic process is to collaborate with scientists and psychologists in order to understand how the elements she works with, primarily motion, light, pattern, form, and space, are received and interpreted by the brain. Perceptual theories and tools she uses to create the desired impact, allowing her to better predict how someone will perceive and experience the work. Her work draws on immersive theater, expanded cinema, experimental film, and psi art. Moving image is always a component in the work, but with emphasis on the physicality and the spatial context. Since graduating, she has exhibited intensively both installations and short film works, including at the Science Museum in London, Kinetica Art Fair, the British Film Institute, and at international events such as the Vancouver Olympics. At Art Laboratory Berlin, Madi Boyd has presented her installation, The Point of Perception, as part of the second Synesthesia exhibition, entitled Synesthesia 2, Space and Perception. Today, Madi will talk about the point of perception on collaborations between artists and neuroscientists. So, welcome, Madi.
So yes, as you heard, this project, The Point of Perception, was at Art Laboratory Berlin for the second part of the Synesthesia series. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit today about the genesis of this project and my interest in perception, then how that was developed, and particularly sort of revolving around synesthesia, and then finally I'll just introduce briefly a new project that I'm currently developing, partly because it correlates very strongly with a lot of the things that we were discussing this morning, a lot of the themes. So I this work is a very, very early work, and this in a way, this is while I was still at university. This, in a way, is kind of the beginning of my interest in perception. I trained as a sculptor, but I kind of started making these optical instruments. This one is actually about 2.5 meters tall or something, so they were sort of often large scale or out of scale. But I became quite interested in these sort of optical instruments. This one has a lens in it, so you can turn it around and look in it, and it changes what you see. So then, sort of as I progressed, I became more and more interested in film as well, and particularly in combining the two together, film and sculpture. I made this work, Enemy Deception, just after leaving, and this is actually a moving image work. So I'm just showing you a still image of it at the moment, but it's essentially a screen. So very much like Point of Perception, a screen made out entirely out of strings. hundreds and hundreds of strings, and all kind of on different planes and interwoven, and then with the film projected onto it. So you never get the same view twice. Well, I suppose you do eventually, but it takes quite a long time. And so this work really led kind of very directly to the point of perception. As you see, there's sort of similarities. And one of the things I was very interested when I made this work and showed it, it generated a lot of interest. And I was and then I was interested in why people were interested in this, because it's essentially abstract. It's monochrome. It's just kind of little points of light fleeing around in space. That's really all you can see. So I was quite interested. There was no narrative. You know, why would somebody sit there for 20 minutes and watch this? It was quite interesting. So I contacted some neuroscientists, because I realized at this point that what I was actually interested in was film and space and sculpture, but it was also really the human visual system. That's kind of the thing I was very interested in and with working. So I contacted some neuroscientists and asked them if they would like to collaborate. And they said yes. And they were Dr. Beau Lotto and Dr. Mark Lythgoe, both based at University College London, in London. And so I kind of spent quite a long time, a year really, sort of working with them, talking to them a lot. They were able to give me space inside their labs, so I actually worked in their labs and saw their work on a daily basis, which was fascinating. Just kind of seeing their experiments. And almost an aside, one of the things that Beau Lotto uses in his work a lot is bees. He experiments on bees, because amazingly, one of the many fascinating things about bees is that they have a very similar visual system to humans. So you can actually do experiments on bees and understand our own visual system. So this is a bee matrix, and they put different lights kind of representing flowers in a way, and they put honey in different flowers, and therefore they can do these experiments and see, for example, that bees can tell the difference between different tones. So, for example, a lighter and a darker blue, not just different colours, things like that. So it was very interesting. One of the other things that Beau uses a lot, which I found fascinating, was illusion. And you can probably see some of these circles moving. I think hopefully some of you can. And of course the circles aren't really moving. I mean, the image itself is not moving, but your brain is making it move. So that's entirely happening in your brain and not on the actual image. So that's one illusion. Another interesting illusion is the hollow face illusion. And you can see the one on the left, you can see as a convex face coming out. The image on the right is actually a concave face. So that image, the face is actually going in. It's just the other side of the first image. And what's interesting about this is that you can show this to people, and you can kind of keep showing that it's the same thing. So you're seeing the other side, and yet it's almost impossible to actually see that image as a convex face, because it's not something that we see. It's not something that's in nature. It's not something we ever experience. And that really shows the kind of the fundamental thing about illusions and about perception, is that it shows that there is no out there. You know, that what we see is 100% constructed in our own brains, and this demonstrates it by the fact that if we haven't experienced something before, the brain won't see it, even if it's actually there. So we can only see partly what's useful for us to see, and partly what has been useful for us to see in the past, because obviously it's an evolutionary process. And so the other thing that demonstrates this is faces in the clouds. You've probably all seen a face in a cloud, or in a fire, or something like this, and it's because obviously for humans, for our survival, it's so important that we can recognize and understand faces, that we often see them in places where they aren't, because that's our brains overcompensating rather than missing a face. It would be worse for us survivally if we missed a face than we see extra ones that aren't there. And so that's why we tend to see these things. So again, it's sort of just a quite sort of interesting thing about perception. So I was kind of researching all of these and looking at these, and I decided that, I really wanted to work in this area of kind of ambiguity or perceptual uncertainty. Now, of course, when I spoke about this with Beau Lotto and said, I want to talk about ambiguity in perception, he said, but everything is ambiguous. There's nothing that we look at that isn't ambiguous. It's just that the brain finds a way to resolve it, and that, as I've said, the resolution is based on experience. So what we decided as a team was to see if we could find a sort of visual tipping point. So this meant a kind of a point between not understanding and understanding what you're looking at, to see if there was some kind of either a phase transition or whether there was actually a point that you could find where people didn't understand what they were looking at, but not so much to the extent that they got bored and stopped looking at it, but they couldn't resolve quite what they were looking at. And we decided that this should be the most interesting place for the mind to be. The mind can't rest. It's trying to resolve what it's looking at, but it feels like it might be able to resolve at any minute. That was really the idea for the installation. So it was meant to be an experiential installation, as you can see, because that was the experience that we wanted to produce in the viewer. So I kind of, in a way as well, a sort of point between form and formlessness, which had always been another interest of mine as a sculptor. There's this kind of idea of when you have form, when you have enough form to know what you're actually looking at. And I think, essentially my kind of tools, as it were, that I use are these sort of, as Olga said, sort of light, motion, form, colour. And these are all also the elements of early stage visual processing. So there's actually 3 stages of visual processing, they believe. And before you get to sort of recognition and memory, you see luminance, motion, form, and colour first. That's the very first thing that you see before you've processed it on to what you're actually, to understanding what you're looking at. And so again, it was abstract. That tends to be my mode. I'm more interested in kind of abstract than representation. And I think the next one should be a video. So this was the sort of first incarnation. Actually, I'll turn the sound off. Of the point of perception, and I've shown it in various places. It doesn't video that well because it's obviously designed for the human eye, so it doesn't come out that well on camera. But this gives you a little bit of an idea. It's quite matrixy. And I mean, in terms of kind of artistic considerations as well, although I was very interested in the perception and the sort of experimenting aspect of it, I still wanted it to be an aesthetic experience, and I didn't see that there was any kind of a clash between those two. So I'm very interested in the theatrical, in the illusionistic, in kind of making the experience in a way kind of as exciting and as magical as I can. And actually the film playing on it, there we go. The film playing on it is actually a film made from photographs of the structure itself. So it's entirely self-contained. So kind of then there was various reactions to the point of perception, and the first one is again relates to what was being talked about this morning, is touch perception, in that almost everybody has to touch it, and it's I think because it's difficult to resolve with the eye, so therefore people need to put their hand out and touch it. And of course that points to another fundamental point about perception, is that it's easier to fool the eye than the hand, and therefore that the hands are incredibly important in terms of perception, and this essentially proved that. And the second kind of interesting thing was again this idea that the kind of emotional reaction to it. So it had a huge emotional reaction, really, in terms of, some people felt quite excited, some people felt quite relaxed, some people felt very calm. Again, some people wanted to kind of sit and enjoy it, experience it for quite a long time. And so, again, I was very interested in why this might be. And I thought about possibly sort of pattern recognition, in a way, which I think might be part of it. But the other then interesting thing I found out when I was kind of researching around patterns was about form constants. And these are shapes that have been categorized by Kluver in the 1930s. And they're various shapes that when, for example, you're in sensory deprivation, or even if you take hallucinogenic drugs, or even sometimes if you just press on your eyeballs, you can get these. And in flickering light as well, that often these percepts come up. And the important thing about these is that they're completely internal. So that, obviously sensory deprivation, you've got no external stimuli at all, and these strange percepts come up, these spontaneous geometric patterns. And so not only are they spontaneous, but they are universal. So almost everybody sees these, which I found fascinating. And as I said, I discovered these after I'd made point of perception, but almost all the patterns that Kluver has categorized are patterns that I used in the film, so completely, without knowing. And so I kind of, so I thought that perhaps one of the reasons why maybe people find the piece quite calming or quite interesting or want to watch it is because of this use of the form constant, and that perhaps there's a sort of some kind of a deep fundamental recognition here. Because these are meant to be, it is thought by some that these are actually based on the architecture of the brain itself, and that's why everybody sees the same. So just a quote from Richard Saitowic, who has written a lot about perception and synesthesia. Many people believe that form constants point to a deep fundamental aspect of perception. I think they don't know quite what that deep fundamental aspect might be yet. So this brought me to synesthesia because form constants have a close association with synesthesia. They're believed to come from the hippocampus, which is so synesthesia and form constants are meant to come from the same area of the brain, they believe. And that therefore they might actually underlie synesthetic perception. And again, this is very interesting for me because I am synesthetic. So, I'd essentially made this piece without necessarily thinking about synesthesia, but then put in these form constants that are synesthetic, and so it kind of came around to that anyway. My own synesthesia is what I call sound vision, because essentially when I hear music or sounds, I get a visual stimulus, so I essentially see sound. It does have colour, but the colour is not particularly important for me in this. It's not the most important aspect of it. It's actually more the form, the movement, and the texture of my synesthetic percepts. And they're very enduring for me. For example, if I go to a concert, I will obviously see the concert, and what I'll remember afterwards is my vision of the concert, as in my synesthetic vision of the concert. And I often can't actually recall the music at all. I'm not very good at recalling music, but I can recall what the music looked like quite well. And for years afterwards, I've got some visions were very strong, and I can still remember them for years. So this is actually some documentation of the piece that I showed here at Art Laboratory Berlin. So I'll just let you listen to this first of all, and then before I tell you about it. Now, once again, documentation of it isn't brilliant because it's just very, very hard to capture on camera. I'm afraid the light bits are kind of too light and the dark bits are too dark. It's not very easy to see. But so with this one, so I developed this one specially for Art Laboratory Berlin. So for this one, it's got sound and colour. And before that, it had been monochrome and silent. So I kind of developed it with these idea of the form constants and the synesthesia in mind. And I didn't write the music myself. I got a composer to write the music. Nye Parry is a composer. But I worked very closely with him to have a correlation. I wanted a very strong correlation between the sound and the image. However, I didn't want to actually sort of try and demonstrate my own synesthesia through this, partly because I thought that would actually be far too difficult, because actually, for example, if I'm listening to something, then every tiny little change in sound has a new percept for me. So I think it would be incredibly complex to try and make that. I also wasn't sure whether that would be that interesting for other people necessarily. And I was kind of more interested in this idea of a sort of universal synesthesia. So, for example, with I think everybody is kind of synesthetic with sound and vision. I think, for example, when we matched up certain things, like when the images were high, the sound was high, and vice versa. And when the images kind of spread out, the sound sort of started in the middle and spread out. And I think it relates to this more sort of universal synesthesia in terms of the way that we talk about music, maybe like fuzzy music or smooth music, or or just high and low. I mean, the language itself, I think, demonstrates that everybody, to some extent, has this sort of mingling of the senses. For me, as I said, I can almost feel some sounds and some music. I know exactly what it would feel like to my fingers if I could touch it. But I think that the language shows that actually this is common to quite a lot of people. And again, from Richard Cytowic, his quote: "Perhaps synesthesia is the conscious awareness of a normally holistic process of perception that is prematurely displayed. If this is correct, then we are all unknowingly synesthetic." So I think his idea, which I'm interested in, is that actually this mingling of the senses is completely universal and everybody has it, but maybe some people are more consciously aware of it on a sort of day-to-day level. Okay. And it's also with for example, with my synesthesia, I had no idea until I was kind of in my 20s that it was anything unusual. Partly because my mother is also synesthetic in the same way, so we would discuss what music looked like all the time, and had no idea that actually not everybody did that. That was just normal. Okay, so just to finish off, I just wanted to talk very briefly about some new work that I've done and a new project, because as I said, I think it really relates. So this a piece that I've just done is called Fragment Cinema. It's much smaller actually. It's a sort of multi-projection object, and it's got film on the inside and on the outside. And the idea is that and all the way around the outside. So the idea is that the film is kind of fragmented. It sort of permeates the screen, and that you actually have to, as the viewer, you are the one that has to move in order to see the entirety of the film. So it was also kind of just going into the ideas of sort of body perception in a way, like as in how your perception might be changed by the where your body is and what it's doing and things like that. So the fact that you have to physically walk around rather than sitting still in a dark space makes a huge difference to how you perceive what you're looking at. And so, yeah, this is just a video of it. So then, developing on from that, the new project that I'm working on is, again, in collaboration with two psychologists, one from Oxford University, one from Royal Holloway. And both of them work in the area of attention. So I'm sort of become very interested in this. But they work in cross-modal attention, and so that's sort of what I want to use in the new work. So, for example, one of them from Oxford University, he works particularly with smell and taste, actually. So he's done a lot of experiments giving people things to eat and drink, and then modulating that environment visually and through sound and so on. And it makes a huge difference to how they actually taste the food, which, again, I mean, you would sort of expect that, but he's actually doing research into this. So I became very interested in this, and I would like to use that, but I'm going to use it kind of in the opposite way, in a way, because my medium is obviously space and film. So what I would like to do is this is the new project, the Fickle Screen. So what I'd like to do is create films, and again they will be abstract films, but present these films in different multimodal environments. And I hope to do a kind of the first part will be a research project to see what difference it makes, and particularly what difference it makes to attention. So if you show the same film in very different environments with very different textures, even smells, maybe even giving them food, different sounds and so on, what difference will that make to what they perceive and what they pay attention to in the film? I think this, in a way, this is quite obvious with sound and film. This has happened for years and years. You know, the music makes a big difference to how you perceive the film, but I don't think it's happened quite so much with different textures and smells and sounds, except for maybe some of the ideas that we were talking about this morning. And what I'd quite like to do is develop that into more systematic research to actually find out, you know, what do people perceive. So, for example, in this one, it would be a room entirely covered with feathers. And actually in the film, which is an abstract film, one of the layering elements is feathers. So does that come out more strongly because you can feel feathers or not? I don't really know. So that's the idea. This is just a little, it's a little motion sketch. So that might be your kind of, this is the same film. Yeah. Don't think I can run it on. But so this would be a film displayed in this feather room. And then the next it's displayed on a screen that is a completely different shape. So it's a more kind of architectural shape, and then following on from that, again it's an environment but with a very different feel to it. And so I would then sort of assess the results from that to see what difference that might make. Just okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Madi, for a very interesting presentation. And personally, I have to tell you that I'm fascinated by your project and by the fact that you, in Point of Perception, you created this immersive space when one can really experience different sensual impressions at the same time and learn more about his or her own perception. Mm-hmm. And then I think it's very interesting that you mentioned that maybe in a way every one of us has synesthesia. Mm-hmm. And then your piece allows us to perceive this universal synesthesia in a way that is maybe more understandable than if we would look at the piece that is very individual, about the individual perception. And then I think that the collaboration of artists and scientists, of neuroscientists and psychologists, as you mentioned, is a very important thing nowadays, and especially in the field of synesthesia. And I think this field has lots of potential for the future research and artistic praxis. So maybe we open our discussion now. So so please, Katarina. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. It's really a fascinating project, and I like it very much. And I'm sorry that I couldn't see it when it was presented here at the Art Laboratory. I just would like to ask you if you could very shortly explain once more how exactly you made it. It's not an algorithm you wrote, but it's a film projection, or how exactly did you do it?
Yes, exactly. It is in a sense just a traditional film projection, because it's just the film. I actually took photographs, hundreds of photographs of the structure itself. So it's composed out of many strings or wires, creating a big grid. And actually then around that is mirrors as well, which then adds to the confusion. So I took photographs of the structure kind of in progress.
And the structure comes where from? You draw it or?
No, the structure is the strings themselves.
Oh, I see.
Yes, and so in Point of Perception they're just grids, They're kind of formal grids. In the first one I showed you, they were on lots and lots of different planes like that. So I've actually got, so some of them are photographs of that one actually, of all the different.
You had more or less an installation before with the strings.
Yeah.
Then you took photos.
Yeah.
And then you projected these photos.
Yeah. Then I edited the photos in a movie editing program. So I sort of edited them together and sort of animated them a bit as well, so they actually move. So the whole thing is just composed out of sort of different patterns of lines, really. And then that is then just projected back onto the strings themselves. And so, of course, you get, because the film is lines and the structure are lines, you end up with some lines but also little points of light. Partly, I think, because the screen itself is so fragmented and three-dimensional that it casts shadows upon itself, so it's got sort of insides and...
Okay, I see. But that's very interesting. So this is there is more or less no algorithm involved.
No.
And the end product is again a projection of the film on a screen. And this is where you took the photo with I think it was Regine, with touching trying to touch it. But then you were touching the screen. The screen.
But the strings.
The strings.
The strings are the screen.
Oh, I see.
So it's not
okay. Oh, I see. So again, you have the strings as the screen.
Yes, exactly. So I call it the screen, but
I see.
But
Okay.
it's not a screen like this as a screen. It's it's
now
made
I understand.
out of strings.
Thank you very much. Okay.
So the next question, I guess Agnieszka.
It's just really more of a comment. I think there's a study by Jamie Ward, was done in the Science Museum in London, and he actually showed that there are those universal mappings, both in synesthetes and non-synesthetes. So, for example, like you mentioned yourself, the high-pitched sound is associated with brighter colors, lighter objects, and smaller size as well, whereas low-pitch with heavy and bigger objects as well. So it seems like there are universalities there.
Yeah. Yes, I think so. And also when I've talked to sound specialists, when they talk about actually the kind of sine waves, it's almost like there's a bit of a correlation with that. So almost like we're seeing the sound waves on some level.
So please. Yeah.
So I too wish to thank you for the evocative talk and to ask a technical question about the touch screens that you mentioned, and I'd like to learn more about how you made it.
Oh, you mean the when it said touch perception?
Sensation,
Yeah,
touch
it is the same thing.
I see. So
Yes, yeah, it's just the screen with the strings. So what it is? So a lot of people touch the strings themselves.
I see. So it's like a staging of a neural system or an immersive environment that entails vision, sound, touch, and
Yes,
so
yeah,
on.
in a way. I mean, I didn't actually design it to be touched. That one, it wasn't particularly meant to be touched, but it's just a kind of it's a natural reaction that most people have, is that they want to touch it, because I think when you first see it, it does just look like a screen in a way, because it's rectangular in shape. So it kind of looks like a bit like a screen like this, but then as you get closer, you realize it's not a flat screen, and that it's got lots and lots of depth, and so on. And what's quite as interesting is that because of its obviously the strings, there's squares in between all the strings, the spaces. What tends to happen is that at first sight, the spaces look solid and the strings look like holes. So it's quite funny. And so then when you touch it, you realize it's the other way around, and it's just that. So it's not a screen in the traditional sense.
Yeah, and I love the freedom you took with the concept of screen. And now when you described it, I had a vision in mind of the matrix that the neuroscientists that you collaborated with have created. So
yeah, I mean, again,
here.
Again, it definitely wasn't meant to represent anything in particular, but that's also one of the interesting things I found about it, is that lots of people came in and they said, "Oh, I feel like I'm watching the brain," which is really nice and a great comment. But I wasn't trying to illustrate the brain, but it's just obviously people's kind of association.
No, I meant this B matrix. from
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Beau
sorry.
Lotto's,
Yes. That. Yes.
lab. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
I have two questions. First, concerning what you quoted from Richard Saitovic, is his name, I think, about the holistic aspect of synesthesia. I read in the book of Oliver Sacks, the one-armed piano player, that one theory about synesthesia is that we as small children are synesthetic, and that we lose along the path of our development mentally and body-wise in terms of differentiating the functions, that we lose synesthesia. Do you know more about it? What would support this?
Yeah, I don't think I know much more than that about it, but I have read that as well. That it's something that they think we're all born with synesthesia, and that most people lose this. They think that there's kind of more, that you're born with more connections in the brain, and that then you lose those connections as you get older, and that with synesthetics, perhaps it's just that those connections didn't wither away for whatever reason, and so they still exist. And it might be a bit to do with attention, actually, because they also say that young children are more attentive to sound than adults are. So again, it's sort of these, and obviously as you get older, with attention, you sculpt your own brain through attention by what you actually notice and pay attention to. And so it might be kind of something like that that most people don't necessarily pay attention to these synesthetic sort of connections, and therefore they disappear. And that some people do still pay attention to them, and so they're still there. But that's all I know about that.
Thank you. And the second question is a personal one about your own synesthesia. If you go, for instance, to a concert, is the visual perception that you have then, is it some kind of criteria about concerning the quality of the music? Is it so that you like the music because you like the visual perception, vice versa? Is it sometimes so that you said, oh, the music was nice, but my visual perception I didn't like so much? Or?
No, actually, no. I think you're the first one. You're right, actually. Is that generally I I don't know which way round it is, but I like the music. I like the sound of the music that I like the look of, or vice versa. And again, when I was sort of having these conversations with my mother, we'll often say, oh, that music's so awful, it's so kind of dark and heavy and pointed, and it sort of and moves downward. We'll often say why we don't like it in terms of the visuals. So I'm not quite sure whether it's an ugly image and therefore I don't like the music, or whether it's ugly music and they're sort of combined.
But it's coherent in all the cases.
I think it is. Yes, I don't think I've really had a situation where I liked the music a lot but didn't like what it looked like. Particularly, it might not be that interesting. Some music's not that interesting, even if it might be. I really enjoy listening to it, but the actual sort of visual side of it is not that interesting.
Thank you.
Can I just ask you quickly, were the images that your mother saw or perceived similar to yours?
No, actually, no. That's because that was a lot of the conversations that we were having, is about the same piece of music, and I would say, oh, it's sort of dark brown and plum-coloured and round, and she'd say, no, don't be stupid. It's like it's very icy. It's blue and silver, and so sometimes it would be really, really different.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to say thanks. Really beautiful work. But I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about the process of collaboration, and in particular what it means to the neuroscientists, what your work is. So does it feed back to them in any interesting way?
Yeah, I think it does, and I think actually, I think it has to some extent, and I actually think that in the new project that I'm designing, I think that will have more feedback for the psychologists, more that they could actually use. I think for the point of perception, it sort of had limited feedback in a way, and that's partly because I didn't want it to be an experiment, so I didn't want to get scientific data from it, because in order to do that, it would have actually made it an incredibly boring piece of artwork, and it was first and foremost a piece of artwork. That was what it was meant to be. So I think they got a lot out of the process in terms of just enjoying doing it and enjoying thinking about it and sort of enjoying helping. I don't think it particularly fed back to their work. And there is quite a lot of controversy around that as well. I mean, I don't know about here, but in the UK, scientific academics, the universities frown a lot on them doing artistic collaborations. So a lot of neuroscientists won't do things because actually it could harm their career. So, yeah, I think it's definitely, it's beginning to open up a lot. I think things are really changing. And also, and the other way as well, a lot of art galleries don't want work that's influenced by science as well. But I think again that's opening up. But it's been very recent, I think.
I guess we have time only for the last question. So, okay. So for two last questions.
Maybe I just wanted to ask, because I've heard this earlier from you, and even one video that you sent in connection with to the open call. How people have perceived it, because we know, because we're there for 2 months, and we watched also people going in and staying half an hour, even though we knew the film only lasts about 8-9 minutes. Mm-hmm. But also some of the stories where it was shown in England as well, and the earlier things, some of the reactions people had.
Yeah, I mean, in a way the same. Like partly, people staying for a long time and people bringing their friends back, and just the sort of different reactions that it had on people really as well. As said, some people it kind of really made them feel excited and energetic, and some people it made them feel very calm. So there were sort of different reactions there. But also I think it seemed to kind of open up the imagination quite a bit, because I did have this thing of people saying, "Oh, it looks like a brain. It looks like the sea. It looks like space." So it sort of, I suppose, gave a space for people to for their imaginations to run. But also I think what it did do, and this was one of the things I'd hoped, that it slightly changed their perception. So they said when they kind of came out, then their perception of the rest of the world was slightly different. I mean, even if only just for a time, but it actually kind of made them, I think it made them hyper aware of perceiving, and so therefore when they came out, they were just more aware of themselves seeing, which was interesting.
Yeah, just one more question. I'd be interested very much in the collaboration with the musician you mentioned, mm-hmm. And this is why I was asking before, because of the algorithm. My talk later will deal a little bit with the translation of the digital code from sound to image, for example. Mm-hmm. But as you didn't use an algorithm, which I think is very interesting, of course, and even more in the sense of synesthetics. How was the collaboration? Did you have? Did he compose? Did he watch the thing and then he composed the music, or was it a feedback thing between the two of you?
Yeah, it's definitely a feedback. Yes, he'd seen it first, and he'd seen it running as an installation first, and then obviously I showed him the film itself, because of course the film that's projected onto it looks quite different from then how it looks when it's projected. There's quite a big difference. So he was kind of, in a way, working between those two things. He was working between having the 2D actual film and watching the movements and the colours and things on that, and then, but also, we sort of built like a little tiny mock-up of the installation so that he could keep trying it out to see what it would look like actually in the installation, and therefore get the sound right. And then we just really kind of worked in that he would come up with a lot of sounds and things, and try out and sort of play me those sounds with different bits of it, and then we'd sort of go through them together, and I would be more choosing rather, obviously I'm not a composer, so I didn't want to write it. Yes, in a way, yes, exactly. It was kind of like a soundtrack, yeah.
Okay, so let us close the discussion for now, and we are moving on to our next speaker. Thank you very much, Madi.